Hello everybody. Today I'm in Jingmai mountain at my tea table in my tea factory, and I want to brew for you two different white teas. This tea, we just made it a couple of days ago, so it's a spring 2019 Yuguangbai moonlight white. It means it's simply dried in the shade of our factories for about 1 or 2 days. And this one is a moonlight white that we made in summer 2018, so that means about 5 months ago. So we're gonna compare those two, so you can first have a look at the leaves, the tiaosuo like we say in Chinese. And first you can see a very noticeable difference, and this one is much greener than that one. And you can also see that this one is loose leaf tea, and that one, that summer tea, has been pressed. It was pressed about 3 months ago after its production. So let's just start it. We're going to do a side-by-side comparison of these two teas. So let's brew this and have a look. I use very simple setting here. That's like our tasting table on our veranda in Jingmai, so we don't have any very fancy teaware here, but it's convenient just to try the teas we've just made and to receive our visitors. So I'm going to let them sit a little bit in the water here, because as you know, white tea is a very simple processing. It's only picked and dried in the shade. There's no other processing, like no rolling, no cooking. And the fact that there's no rolling makes the tea harder to brew at the beginning. I mean, it's harder to extract the stuff that you have in the tea when you have no rolling, because the purpose of rolling is to kind of pre-brew, pre-extract some of the stuff that's in your tea. Okay, so let's go with the rinse. Let's have a look at the rinse. So I used maybe 1 or 2 minutes rinse, maybe 1 minute and 30 seconds, and that's for that reason, because there's no rolling. So don't hesitate to give it a longer than usual rinse. And here, well, you can see that both teas have a clear soup, and the summer tea has a much darker soup than the tea we just made in spring 2019. Okay, let me just rinse those cups. And so here is what it looks like just after the rinse. I hope you can see it well. So you can see that that spring tea looks almost like fresh leaves, almost as if I had just soaked the fresh leaves with hot water. And this one could look a little bit like black tea, but you can see that the leaves are much more open than in a black tea. Why? Because a black tea might have the same color, but it has a strong rolling, and it means that the leaves usually have a very twisted shape, while the white tea will dry with the leaf remaining flat. So for the beidixang of the rinse, the beidixang is the smell that you get inside that pitcher. Usually when you pour it out, then the remains of the tea evaporate, and that gives a very fragrant stuff. And I can smell a lot warmer fragrance in the summer tea, while this one is a bit more aggressive, more floral, and reminds a bit of the smell of fresh leaves, actually, the nice smell we have in our tea factory every day. Okay, so let's go for the first brew. Again, I will give it quite a long brewing time. Anyway, you can't really overbrew white tea. It will hardly get any bitter. Sometimes I brew white tea in a big mug before going to bed, and then I forget it, and on the next morning I can drink it and it's not really bitter. So it's kind of a casual tea. That's why I like white tea, because you don't really need to care too much, but yet it can offer very complex fragrance profiles and a lot of sweetness generally. So let's go. At this point I like to have a look again at those leaves. So here you can see they are mostly green, but you can see red spots, which is due to oxidation. And typically the oxidation here comes in spots. It's typically because in some parts of the leaves maybe they got some bruises during the picking and transportation and moving around. And on this one you can see a much more uniform color. I think this tea will keep oxidizing, but it's still already very dark. I can also see some little black spots on the leaves, and those might be insects actually that just ate some parts of the leaves. Typically the insects, they puncture a hole in the in the waterways of the leaves and try to suck the nutrients that are flowing through the waterway, that's called phloem. So a lot of insects, they like to feed on that phloem, on the water that circulates and carries around all the stuff that the leaf needs. So you can have a lot of punctured tea leaves in summer, because you have high temperature and a lot of rain, and that means you usually have a lot of insect activity in the summer. So this first white tea, the spring white tea, is very light. There's almost no thickness at all in the mouthfeel. It has a very high-pitched fragrance. You know, it goes very far into the nose. You can feel it very high. Let's try the summer tea. Yeah, this one is much fatter. It's really at the bottom. It kind of sits at the bottom of the tongue. And it's also a bit less fragrance. It's also a bit less fragrant. I would say that the fragrance is here. It's still complex, but it's much more smothered and much more at the bottom and more like in the throat. But this one has a good sweetness. Well, both have sweetness, but I would say this one seems to have a bit more sweetness. And it's quite strange, because usually sweetness is related to heavy mouthfeel, but here it's not. Like it's really like water in the mouth, but once you've swallowed it, you get that lingering sweetness on the gums in the back of the mouth. So why are those two teas so different? You can see that the summer tea is highly oxidized, and the spring tea we just made is very low oxidation currently. Well, there are two reasons for this. First reason is that the spring tea, nowadays the air is very dry, and you know that white tea dries only by contact with the air. So if the air is drier, the leaves will dry much faster. And these days we can make white tea in about 1.5 days of drying. While in summer it's always raining, and we need at least 3 days. We typically need 3 days to get the tea really dry. And sometimes it's not even dry enough. We have to wait for the sun to come out a little bit and finish the drying with a little bit of sun drying. Otherwise the stems and the very thick leaves never get quite as dry as you want. If your tea is not dry enough, that might cause problem when you store it, because then you can have microbial activity if it's not dry enough, basically. So remember, summer tea was dried for 3 days and spring tea was dried for 1.5 days. Well, from the time you pick the tea leaves to the time the tea is dry, enzymatic activity is occurring. It means that your tea is getting redder, darker and darker. Okay, it's called browning. It happens in all the leaves that you pick. That's typically what happens in autumn. That's why the forests turn yellow and red and then brown in autumn. It's just because the leaves fall down the trees. They are green. As that enzymatic oxidation occurs, they are turning redder and redder. Since the summer tea had time to oxidize for 3 days, right after its production it was already more oxidized than this spring tea we have now. So that's the first reason why the summer tea is darker than the spring tea. The second reason is aging. This tea has aged for about 5 months, and this one for only a couple of days. And why is the change so dramatic in white tea, while you could say for poor tea they would be, of course, the one aged for 5 months would be a little bit redder, but not as dramatic as difference as here. It's because at no point we deactivate the enzyme. The enzymes are slowed down only because the tea is dry. There's a relation between the water content in the leaf and the enzymatic activity. And so if your tea is dry enough, the enzymatic activity will be slowed down. But if you put 2 teas with the same water content, one is poor tea and one is white tea. In the poor tea, maybe you've destroyed like 90% or 95% of the enzymes, while in white tea, you've destroyed 0% of the enzymes. So that explains the difference. Oxidation in white tea is much faster than in poor tea or any other kind of tea. So it's a very, very vegetal fragrance. It's really the closest fragrance you can get to the fresh leaves, really. It smells a bit like, well, it smells like inside my tea factory when I just got all the leaves from the mountain. So I wouldn't say it's a complex fragrance as of now, but it's an interesting one. A little bit minty, very refreshing. The sweetness is here. Here I brewed it's quite strong, and yet not so much bitterness. A little bit of bitterness here, but not so much. And this one is much softer. This one is really much softer and with a much more kind of bass-like fragrance, while this one would be very high-pitched fragrance. So I would say at this point, maybe I'd prefer this one if I wanted just a casual tea to drink and to relax. It has a good mouthfeel, decent sweetness. The fragrance is here, but it's not as extravagant as this one, but it's more complex, I would say. But I think in the long term, the spring tea will very likely be better because the material we have in spring is better. Typically you have more stuff, more polyphenols in the spring tea than in the summer tea. So summer tea tends to be a bit weaker. Well, at least that's true when you make poor tea. There's a clear difference between spring tea and summer tea. That difference is present in white tea or black tea, but it's not as dramatic as for poor tea. If you're a tea producer, I recommend that you value your low season tea, like when tea is quite cheap. You can make very decent black tea and white tea. And I think it's probably due to the oxidation. I would think that highly oxidized teas tend to not reveal the true nature of the raw material as much as low oxidized tea. That's only a guess, but generally I think that's how it goes. And there's another reason why this tea is darker than this one. It's also because this one has been pressed. And you remember I just mentioned that enzymatic activity is accelerated. Well, the enzymes work much faster when the tea is wet, And what do you do for pressing tea? Well, you have to steam the tea to make the leaves softer, more flexible, and press them into a cake, like the cake you can see here. So if you press the white tea into tea cake, it will give it like 1 year of aging for free. That's about how dramatic the change is. So I will keep drinking these two teas. If you have more questions about white tea and oxidation and all that stuff, please leave your question in the comment section and I will try to answer as well as I can. If you like this video and would like more people to see it, please give us a thumbs up in the YouTube video. That will help us with the YouTube algorithm, help the video reach more viewers. And if you like this channel, of course you can subscribe. And now thank you for watching and see you later. Bye bye. 可以了。所以我跟你解释